I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Awabakal people. I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the hopes, the promise and the future for First Nations Australians. My name is Tiarne Shutt. I'm a proud Worimi woman and also a member of the CareerTrackers Alumni. Today I'm here on Awabakal land at the Wallatuka Institute within the University of Newcastle with Leah Armstrong. Leah is the Indigenous Reconciliation and Engagement Director at the University of Newcastle. She is also the Managing Director of First Australians Capital. Thank you so much for joining us today, Leah.
I'm very pleased to be here, Tiarne. Thank you.
Leah is a Torres Strait Islander woman with ties to Boigu Island, and she has been living in Newcastle for about 30 odd years, I think. And Leah's career is really impressive. What we're going to talk about today is Leah's journey, leadership, mentorship, so it's really exciting to have you here. I want to hear about your career journey. So you are probably one of the most impressive business executives in Australia. You've made impacts in the private sector, the public sector, academic, community. It's quadruple threat. Yeah, there you go, quadruple threat. And you've been the CEO of Reconciliation Australia, the chairperson for Supply Nation. I think you've been a board member at CSIRO, CareerTrackers, Foundations for Young Australians, the Smith family. You founded Yarnteen. So all that, a huge career that you're still having to this day. What has been the most memorable moment or highlight for you?
Wow. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Tiarne. And actually, when it's being sort of spoken back to you or told back to you, I just actually start to realise, oh my gosh, what a sort of winding and long journey I've had in sort of the careers and the roles that I've had. But fundamentally, to all those roles has been, my purpose and passion for social justice, economic self-determination for our communities, and reconciliation. And what have been some of the sort of defining moments? Look, there are probably so many in different roles, but I would say taking it right back to Yarnteen. One of the proudest moments is when we being a co-founder for Yarnteen Aboriginal Corporation here in Newcastle back in the early 90s, so it's going back quite a few years. With a real core focus on economic independence for the local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. And the proudest bit about that is that we were able to achieve economic independence within our 10-year time frame, which was quite significant. So we were running our own commercial warehousing ventures. We invested in commercial property deals. We set up our own cultural and ecotourism ventures, and also reinvesting back through social and other ventures and training, like a conference facility, Yamalong conference facility, and a training centre. So I think, I would actually say that, Yarnteen in some way was at the forefront of what social and commercial enterprises or social enterprises are now called. So for me, that I guess is one of the proudest moments, that we can actually say that Yarnteen, became an economically independent organisation within 10 years. But I guess one of the other moments from that, and it's just brought up to me just recently, is actually back in maybe early 90s, we invested in an Aboriginal entrepreneur who needed an investment for about $5,000. Mick Davis was his name, and he developed the Davis Star Picker. So any of you who are in the rural communities would know about star pickets and how to get them out. So Mick needed an investment of $5,000 to help him sort of go around to ag shows and promote that. Well, the other day, he is now in Rockhampton, and he has his own sort of construction company up there, which is employing many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Rockhampton. His sons are now gone into business themselves, so that generational change is really important. And he actually remembers that the fact that Yarnteen and myself and others actually gave him that start, that $5,000 start, and that's what he's doing now. And I would add also, because as I said, economic independence is really what we've been about. Just recently, like yesterday, First Australians Capital got our first investment capital for our Indigenous Enterprise Impact Fund. So, and you'll be interested to know that one of our first investments is into a CareerTracker alumni, Morgan Coleman, with his Vets on Call app. So,
yes, that's on call.
Yeah. So I think, that is really quite a proud moment too, that here we are sort of an Indigenous-led, probably one of the first Indigenous-led not-for-profit investment fund, investing in our own mob.
I love that your proudest moments are still around people and like community, and like your passion is still, like your career is centered on that, which is such I think it's a cultural thing, it's a community thing, but it's lovely to hear that like your proudest moments are still like centered on mob and people and community, which I think is a really important thread for people to remember, like for alumni, for interns, for community partners to keep throughout their careers. But I want to ask, just on the back of that, why is economic independence so important? Like why, like from government, why is that so important for our mob?
Look, I can only go back to my own experience and my own family experience, and how, I grew up obviously with a very large Torres Strait Islander family in Mackay, but also real entrepreneurs, and so my uncles, they ran their own companies, from crane hire to machinery hire, very entrepreneurial, and actually getting into crocodile farming and sort of lots of those. Pop was a showman, who went around educating people about the snakes and how to, take care of snake bites and survive, obviously, and help develop the anti-venin for the taipan. And so there's been this kind of entrepreneurial sort of aspect between, flowing through my family. Yeah. And I'd seen how having that economic independence, creates, I guess, the culture and the values of not only looking after family and looking after immediate family, but actually giving back into community and helping community grow as well. So that's why I believe, and defining what culture means to us, and defining how the future of, our children and where we want them to go as well. So, and I left school, before getting my year 12 to work in my stepfather's picture framing business.
I didn't know that.
So I grew up well and truly in small business and knowing how to run small businesses. So bringing that kind of, I guess, understanding and experience, and then settling in Newcastle and working with a Wabakal Aboriginal cooperative when I first got here, who are an amazing organisation. They've celebrated their 40-year anniversary probably 2 years ago, but they have probably been also one of the leading cooperatives and social welfare organisations in Australia, with issues of addressing the health issues through, community controlled medical centres, childcare centres, housing, elders transport, cultural. So the really breadth of that social welfare service delivery. But one of the gaps that they identified themselves, but knew that it needed a different approach, was around economic development.
And that's when you came in.
That's when Yarn Team came in to fill that sort of gap where we can create not just jobs in mainstream for the local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, but actually create our own jobs through running our own businesses.
Yeah. So you've had a huge career. You're still having a huge career. You're a leader, and it's one of the reasons why I admire you is your big career. So you didn't just become a leader, you obviously grew into who you are today. And I think it would be really useful for our community to understand what process you went through to become who you are, like the leadership part of you, and what are the capabilities that you think are important for the future Indigenous professionals, just based off your experience.
Look, and absolutely, I think, if the pathway to achieving a career goal is through education, and I totally believe the higher education is a fantastic pathway to get there. So certainly I wouldn't recommend people follow the journey that I have taken. But when I think about those moments back in terms of what sort of potentially defined and helped me create the capabilities that have helped me to lead, not necessarily be a leader, helped me to lead in the work that I've been able to achieve for our community. Look, and I keep going back to the family and the people most closest to you and the influence they have on you. So absolutely from my family, and the respect for cultural diversity and cultural opinions. And I think that's really important in terms of leadership. And then, one of the things I did do was, which adds to that, is actually go overseas experience different cultures, experience the way other people live their lives, and just absorb all that. So, you know, when I left school, that's what, you know, I did. I kind of worked, went overseas, travelled a bit, come back and worked. And they really created sort of, you know, really strong sort of, I guess, values and what I saw were important to me going forward. And another thing along the way is looking at potential, I guess, role models. So I said, you know, entrepreneurship has always been part of, you know, our growing up, but looking at role models in what does an economic outcome, or what should a business look like? And certainly, you know, at that time, you know, Anita Roddick started the Body Shop, and how that sort of, you know, that new sort of social impact in terms of how you run a business and doing business differently. So thinking differently and doing things differently was really important.
So when did you first notice that business, like you needed to think differently in business? Like early on in your career, like Yarn Teen was something very different, and what made you go, what was that aha moment for you to realise we need to change?
Yeah, look, I think there may have been a number of, you know, elements along the way, but actually it's when I actually picked up Business as Unusual, which was the book by Anita Roddick, who started the Body Shop, and you know, about how business can contribute to society in a different way. And it was really one of those moments inspiring, that's kind of like, okay, yeah, this is how we can, you know, think differently about how business should be contributing back to society. And one of the favourite quotes that, you know, I pull from that book is, when business is managed from the heart, great things can and will happen. All that is stopping us is our imagination. You know, so I mean, that then sort of really sort of set off in terms of how we can think about, you know, economic and business development in a different way, and Yarn Teen was part of that process as well. And then, you know, roll forward a few extra years and thinking about, well, how do you lead in an organisation, and how do you grow an organisation to be sustainable and you know, achieving the objectives both from a community and a financial and a cultural perspective as well. And again, another sort of book that was introduced to me was by Jim Collins, How Do You Take a Good Organisation to Be Great? So the good to great philosophy.
To great,
yeah. And so that's been one of those sort of seminal sort of books that I've used, and, you know, in terms of developing organisations that I've been involved with.
So we talk about at CareerTrackers that the fight back then is different to the fight now. And you're one of those people who were fighting for reconciliation, having those difficult conversations with corporations and private sector that I think a lot of people take for granted today. I know I did, because it's very common now reconciliation is such a common and important topic in business. And I'd be interested to know, the two-pronged question is, what have you seen change in Australia? What has been the changes in equality, self-determination, reconciliation, a standout for you? And I wonder what you think, because I think you're a very strategic thinker, what are the trends or the future opportunities or risks for Indigenous professionals? So yeah, what have you seen change, and probably what you've participated in the change, and what do you think is the next fight or the next opportunity for us as a collective?
Well, that's a really, really good question there, Tiarne. You're really putting me on the spot here. Look, I think certainly, from the outset, I think the language has changed. And as you talked about, you know, social entrepreneur is talked about in the language. But I would like to acknowledge that our people and our mob were innovating, and social innovators well and truly. It's just a different language back then, and certainly, as you say, there's been a lot gained from the work that has happened. We're just in a different time, and technology, the way people work is different at the moment. So I think the whole sort of society has changed as well. But in terms of the reconciliation space, and I absolutely agree that what's changed there is certainly there's a lot more conversation.
Yeah,
you know, a lot
absolutely.
more people talking, as you said. A lot of the Career Tracker alumni people, they're in organisations that have reconciliation action plans. So that's become the norm in pretty much most organisations. And in fact, if you don't have a reconciliation action plan, the question is being asked. And you know, the RAP is a framework. It's just a framework to help organisations who want to be involved in, you know, addressing reconciliation and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander disadvantage. But it's really what comes from those actions in terms of building knowledge. And certainly, like I said, what's changed is that conversation, a greater cultural awareness. We haven't yet got to deeper cultural responsiveness from the non-Indigenous people of Australia.
What do you mean by deep cultural responsiveness?
Well, I mean, awareness is just a starting of, you know, our history and, you know, the impacts. But actually, what are they doing to respond to ensuring none of those actions of the past are repeated?
Yeah.
And what role do they respond to, you know, addressing the current issues? And there are still some really deep ingrained issues as racism, systemic racism, that hasn't moved. You know, as much as we've had this great conversation about reconciliation and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander culture and history, celebrating our you know, our strength and our cultural strength has been advanced, but we haven't really budged in terms of addressing systemic racism and unconscious bias in organisations and in the community. And I think that still remains a challenge.
So that's our challenge.
That's a challenge for Career Tracker students and alumni, to actually change the culture within organisation where that systemic racism and unconscious bias exists, as well as in communities. So, and it's not just it's not just Career Trackers' responsibility.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I mean, it's everyone's responsibility. And you know, that's one of those dimensions that, you know, Reconciliation Australia have identified. If we are to achieve Reconciliation Australia, how do we deal with race relations? How do we address the issues of equity and equality? Because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are still, you know, not at equal or having equity in that aspect. You know, how do we deal with truth-telling and acceptance of our history? So there's still quite a few to go, yes. And institutional integrity, and that's where the RAPs come into play, is how do corporations actually, you know, walk the talk and live up to that integrity? And then, you know, how do then we ensure we get a united Australia? So I think, you know, there is still a lot more work to do.
Yes.
But I think, you know, with, you know, the leaders that are coming through Career Trackers, lots of other organisations, our hope and our wish that these conversations do turn from just purely conversations to actually real commitments to addressing those issues.
Thank you, though, for being that person before we all came along as well. Like, I think everyone should thank you when they see you virtually or in person or whatever. We all can come. This year has been bananas, but like off what you said, like systemic racism, like we have it's 2020, so Black Lives Matter has occurred this year. It's really brought to light a lot of difficult conversations that our alumni and interns have had to broker and had to be a part of, willingly or not willingly. And I guess that sort of leads into my next question about difficult decisions and difficult conversations and the tensions and everything that we kind of go through, or I personally go through as an Indigenous woman, which I know you've probably been through and other people. And it'd be great to understand, you know, those difficult moments of your career or, you know, difficult decisions you've had to make, like, how did you make those? And how do you weigh up, you know, you know, some of our alumni are working in organisations not quite at the level they want them to be, but we've got to work with them. So what do we do internally? How do we make ourselves feel culturally safe? You know, we've got to prepare ourselves for the system that we didn't design. But yeah, how have you dealt with that? I mean, that's a big question. I'm just hitting you. I'm just like, tell us everything
holding back, are you?
No, sorry. I'm not even a little sorry, because I think you're so capable for it. Yeah, how have you, if there's any examples as well of a difficult moment that you can share?
Yes, I mean, we all are challenged with those difficult decisions constantly. And for me, I've always approached decision making about whether it's a role to take on or whether it's a project or how to engage differently. With firstly, asking myself, what do I bring to, why should I get involved? Why am I really needed in this role, or what do I actually bring? What benefit does that bring to the community? I'm very much purpose driven. Everything I do is around the purpose, and that purpose ultimately is getting better outcomes for our communities. So, what is the benefit to communities? If in taking on a role, and I'll use this example, and forgive me, and people who potentially, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this, but
love it.
The question was, when I was asked to join the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council under Prime Minister Tony Abbott, there was a lot of conversation prior to all that in the community about these types of groups or councils being hand-picked. They're not representative of community, and are they the voice that should be advising? So, and then there was a previous council where the conversation was held as well. So, weighing up, that sort of criticism, and rightly, from communities versus actually what benefit would it be being at the table? What could I add and what could I bring to being at the table and having a voice at the table? Even more so because my own values or my own perspectives did not necessarily align with the Prime Ministers or other members and that. So weighing up those decisions around, okay, what is it that I bring? Does it fit with the purpose, of why, benefit to community? Does it fit with, values in terms of, respecting diversity of perspectives as well?
Yes.
As I said, cultural diversity is important, and respecting that as well as perspectives. Yeah. So how could I sort of go into into a council like that where there will be differing perspectives, still stay true to my own values and be authentic about that, but also be comfortable that not everybody's going to agree.
I think that last bit's really important, being comfortable that not everyone's going to agree with you. And I love that you brought that example up, because that is a great example of that difficulty, of that tension of different views, but weighing up the community first. And I think it's great for our alumni who are definitely thinking about those difficult decisions and weighing up all those things. So thank you for sharing that. So to wrap up our conversation, I want to switch to CareerTrackers. And in 2014, you spoke about the 10-10 partnership with Leighton Contractors. It was the first time we did the 10-10. And you talked about it being a really important partnership because it goes to the heart of long-term sustainable economic sustainable change, which is sort of what we've been discussing this whole chat. So why is CareerTrackers and what we're trying to do so important in your opinion? I mean, you've mentioned that you've been around since we were little babies and Michael founded the organisation. So one thing why you think it's a really important, network, and what would be a message you have just for the students, the alumni, people in our ecosystem?
Look, absolutely. And look, 2014, we were only sort of pretty much only halfway through that 10-year. And I absolutely believe that in the next 5 years, and I think this is where we really see the value of CareerTrackers, that I'm hoping, where we've got, these new leaders coming through organisations who've worked their way through into senior positions. Yep. And the beauty about the 10 by 10 is actually it's demonstrated to, I guess, the broader corporate and government sectors that it's a long term. It's 10 years. We shouldn't be thinking about programs that are 2-year or 3-year. We need this generational change that's 10 years plus. And I'm really excited, like I said, in the next 5 years when I really think we'll start to see real impact. When the CareerTracker alumni and group really start to get in those senior decision-making positions. And I do hope that, for CareerTracker alumni, that their Indigenous leadership is a relationship leadership style. It's a networked leadership style. So I think that's really critical and important to alumni to maintain those relationships with one another, support one another, and you know, really, you know, as a group, I hope that you appreciate and without putting any pressure on you, you know, we'll all be looking to you to make changes. But you know, I'm really excited about what's to come.
Yeah, great.
And if I was to finish off, I would like to sort of again quote President Barack Obama, who quoted that it is you, the young and fearless generation, the most educated, the most diverse generation that the nation has been waiting for.
Well, if that's not the most inspiring way to finish, I don't know what is. So thank you so much, Leah, for your time, your wisdom. I know everyone has gained so much from hearing your story, and I also love hearing your start of your story with your family. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure, and it's been always wonderful to be talking to CareerTrackers, and you know, being involved from the very beginning of CareerTrackers. It's been one of the, you know, my highlights, watching it grow as an organisation, but also watching the individuals, the students, as they have gone through the journey, and then our alumni.
Yeah, it's
so
great.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm sure we've all gained so much from that. I know I have, so thank you so much.